Hello. Happy
Good evening.
Thursday, everyone.
Today is May the 4th be with you. Uh huh. Uh
Yes.
huh.
I
Uh
forgot about
huh.
that one. I forgot about that.
I've been waiting all day to say that. The Star Wars. Yeah, yeah,
I've seen some of them, but one day I want to watch them and actually figure out what's going on.
yeah. They're
So,
different now. I grew up on like the Star Wars, like Star Wars, Return of the Jedi, and then
yeah,
now they have the newer versions. I haven't kept up with them, but
I've heard they're different too cuz someone took them over or whatever, but and they're out
hmm
of order, right? So, but should I watch them in the order they came out, I guess?
yeah. I mean, if you see, I didn't keep up with the newer ones. So I don't know how much of the story they actually follow. The
Mm,
first three for me they follow. Well, Return of the Jedi was anyway. The first three did it for me.
okay.
Hmm
I don't know, one of these days. But anywho, well, as we wait for folks to join us. I see Lady Navoa in the chat. Hello, my favorite.
Yes, yes,
Welcome
yes.
to
Glad you were here.
another night, another breaking the cycle with Dr. Nakumbe and me, Coach K, on the Black Men Unfiltered.
Network.
Your turn.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
you take it from here, Doc.
Well, good. Well, how was your week?
Good, busy,
Good, good.
but it's been good.
Okay.
Really, I mean, of course, I love this topic, but I've been reading a bunch of books
Yep.
lately about this topic and things like that. So it's
Okay.
been a good week. How about you?
Good, good, good. Uh, I've not been reading, but I've been good.
You're
give a shout out
busy.
to our technician in the back, CBN. Thank you for doing what you do. And give my shout out
Yes.
to the Black Man Unfiltered Network. Thank you for allowing us this space to have these conversations about mental health and breaking the cycle, that belief that mental health is in some communities not real, government planned or government uh, in, implanted
Ron,
stuff
maybe.
like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, government run medication and pharmaceutical companies, just wanting your money,
Mm-hmm.
therapy being. But if you had it or have not had an opportunity to engage in some type of mental health or some type of development, personal development, we are happy to be here to have those conversations about how therapy can help, coaching can help. And remember, there are a ton of different ways to receive that type of therapy. So anything from what they just call talking, like couch talk. You see those pictures where the person's laying on the couch and just
Yeah.
talking.
Yeah.
Um, but really allowing yourself just to flow, whatever comes to mind, talking. There's very strategic type. Uh, let's do some short term solutions based stuff. There's stuff that targets trauma or pain that
Mm-hmm.
you have or mental blocks in your head. There's even with the coaching, I consider coaching to be like therapy on steroids because you're targeting certain things you want to get to,
Yeah.
creating a plan on how to do it, and like having that cheerleader with you to motivate you as a support person and taking that journey with you. So there are
Yeah.
many ways. I want to say no excuses for people to get help for their overall wellness and mental health. And
There
tonight's
really aren't.
topic is a continuation from the last few weeks where we've been talking about the woke culture. And in that conversation is highly sensitive. So I do want to say, or we want to say, that the views that Coach K and I are talking about here may not necessarily match everyone on the network. So this is pretty much our conversation that we're having with you. We're being mindful to not be offensive, but please know we are having authentic and raw or real conversations, but again, with
Right.
no intent to offend or to harm. or to mischaracterize or misjudge anyone. So, again, the views may not necessarily be shared with the network, but we are here to have that conversation about parents and how parents either, I want to say coach, but how they raise their children with kind of yesteryears, or how they were raised and their beliefs and their practices and their
Mhm.
values and their morals and their family traditions, and now
Right.
raising what they call what a modern day youth or adolescent with their values, not just their own personal ones that they're developing, but we're very active. We have a very active society through social media.
Yes.
News is passed on much faster these days. Certain groups are growing faster these days. Back in the day, I remember clothes being kind of the way that you attach to a certain group. We're the Nike group, we're the Adidas group,
Mhm.
we're the
Mhm.
whatever that was, and it was a trend. So like people attached to certain trends or a certain
Right.
like gang like mentality. So if you're part of this group or this gang, but now there's so many options, and it becomes what they call viral. Which route do you want to go? So parents are competing with school systems, uh, social media. The laws have changed. They've adjusted over time in the name of protection or to help support families and youth. But parents are in a unique position where they're dealing with legal issues, social media, what society says, what the culture says, what the culture
Mhm.
of that youth says, the school says. So today we wanted to continue that open conversation and dialogue, and even invite a parent onto the show. So,
Yep, that's right.
mhm,
I wanted to mention, and one day we might have to get into like a deeper dive about this, but I told you I'm reading this book about this generation, and it's interesting. They pull data from a bunch of different sources, just
mm,
surveys, but surveys that have been taken since some, like one of them's 1970, one's
mhm,
1980,
mm,
and just to get an idea of the trends of what that generation, when they're teens and adolescents, what they're into, what they're doing. So even like the boomers, or maybe the boomers were included in there, but
mhm,
especially Gen X and millennials. I think I'm considered a millennial. I'm like at the very end. And do you want to
mhm.
share what you're in?
I'm a millennial.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
uh,
So,
70s. Yeah,
okay, well, there you go.
let me check.
So when these groups were, teens, and what's interesting is that this generation, some call them Gen Z or
Hmm.
iGen, kind of like iPad or for internet, they are not going out as much. They're not partying. They're not driving, getting their licenses as
Mm,
early. They're not so drinking as early,
mhm,
drugs, um, even sex, even dating, things like that.
mm,
And what the author, and I believe she is a behavioral sociologist or something. She's definitely credible. She specializes um in this field, especially with adolescents and teens, but in research, in the research aspect. But what's interesting too is she's like, well, maybe they're just doing homework, or they're studying, or they're working. They're not working as much as other generations. They're not volunteering as much, and they're slightly under the average for
mm.
homework. So what are they doing? Well,
Hmm.
they're on their phones.
Oh yeah, yeah. Technology.
Yeah, and they're also the safest in terms of, and again, these are from surveys and things, and I can pull up the numbers. So fascinating. but they're less as likely to run away from home. Um,
Mm,
and they're they're closer with their parents in the sense that they don't, disagree with rules. Like they're most protected. And we've talked about this as far as, you know, kids not kids, teens, I'm sorry.
mhm,
Not going out there with, risk taking, which is natural, but and it makes sense that if they're not going out into the real world,
mhm.
physically interacting, um, then they're not going to have that resilience and those skills. And I know this is a big topic, but I thought it was fascinating to see how they're so interactive online, but getting they're not lack of a better way to say it, they're not getting roughed up a bit,
Mm,
and developing
mhm.
those natural coping mechanisms, but also just experiences to deal with those things. So I just think it's
Right.
fascinating. So do with that
So,
what you will, but yes.
mhm. So when you say some of like not some of the natural skills, so not because there's a big push for like what the artificial intelligence. So are you saying like maybe
Mm-hmm.
they're learning more from it's not technology teaching them, but what would
They're
that's how are they learning now?
So they're not learning like conflict resolution. They're
Right.
not learning even just the communication and the non-verbal, and cuz
Hmm.
now it's like, well, if someone was mad at you, you might read their facial expression or
Hmm.
something like that. But now if someone doesn't message you, which could be totally
Oh,
harmless, maybe they're busy, now the
right.
anxiety is way up. So
Yep.
they're
Yep.
not getting those types of they're not building that type of like callus or
Yep.
like, you know what I mean?
Yep. Yep.
That
Tough
naturally
tough
comes with
skin
human
or
interaction.
yeah,
Mhm.
real life experience because some of that I guess would be assumptions. If I haven't heard from you, well,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
expectation like how come you
Yes.
didn't message me back in X, Y, and Z?
Yes.
And then the assumption, um, wow. Now
Yes.
running away,
Mhm.
I would think it's the opposite because there seems to be so much more to do or to get into or to be
You would
part of.
think.
Yes, I'm surprised. Oh, wait, well, you just said the technology. I guess I don't
They
need
don't
to
have
be
to.
there,
They don't have
right?
to. Yeah. Yeah.
Ah,
And one of her chapters is in person nor no more, I'm with you,
uh-huh.
only virtually. And
Mm-hmm.
that's something which that's interesting too, is that we hear about, and this goes along with what we were talking about last week,
Mm-hmm.
is that they're safe in their homes. They're not leaving home. They're not leaving. Parents are still like helping take care of stuff, whatever. Which she talks about some stats on that too, as far as like money goes. But since they're safe there, that's why they want to be safe in the
Mm,
universities, in the colleges. Not physical safety, obviously,
right,
of
right.
course, but as far as emotionally safe.
Mm, mm-hmm.
So, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense. It's
Yep.
really fascinating, but yeah. So,
Yeah,
this is
it's
this is
interesting
huge
because
stuff.
I was learning about adults who almost similar to that. They're not because I was surprised by they're not engaging in as much uh, having random partners,
Mhm.
which at first I read as a like, whoa, that's good. Let's partner.
Right, right, right,
But it tied into well, then I mean they're not meeting. They're not the media is how they're connected versus before it's a
right.
lot of social interaction. How much do you think of
Exactly.
that is related to COVID?
I do think a lot of it is,
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of it is in it just I think it if not, it just heightened it,
Mm-hmm.
um, but I think she the time period is from maybe like she starts around 2012 and
Mm-hmm.
2013, and just the graphs are just
Mm.
they are just either, well, depending on what it is, just straight like it's incredible.
Yep. So what
So
group? You said that's the.
It's called iGen. So, like lowercase I, kind of like iPad
Uh-huh.
or
All right,
iPhone,
Jen.
and then Gen. Yep. It's
They super
Gene.
connected kids are growing up. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Just nothing but graphs on almost every page. And she takes, at
Oh,
the beginning,
mm-hmm.
let's see, she says, and then I know we are going to bring our
Oh,
guest
so
up.
it's Gen Z that's considered iGen.
Yeah, she wanted, I think she talks about how she wanted iGen to stick, but I
Uh-huh.
think Gen Z stuck.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting. Who I never thought of who even names these.
Right. So 95. Oh, so 95 to 2012 is when they were
Hmm.
born.
Yep. And then millennials is 1990 or 1980. I
80.
can zoom
Yeah,
here
it
to
must be 80 to
1994.
95 or 94.
Hmm.
So,
Wait, then
so actually, I
maybe.
said I said I'm a. What you say, millennial? So
Oh,
actually, I'm a
I'm
Gen X.
iGen.
Oh, you're
I don't
iGen.
know. Well, I think some of them are. I think some of them are give or take. I'm gonna be a millennial. Okay, I'm just
Yeah,
gonna label myself a
yeah.
millennial.
I'm actually Gen X
Okay.
before the 80s.
Well, if you want to
So, but
still
then
say
when
you're a millennial, that's
I
fine.
wonder what the so 95 we had iPhone. When did iPhone come out?
Let
Because
me
there was
see.
iPod, but that's just the music stuff, right? But I think even some of the music stuff helped people to not
2007.
could not connect actually to isolate. Because I'm off to my
Um,
own listening to my music. That's isolating, not necessarily
right,
connect.
right. 2007. I think the smartphones, which I
Yes.
would consider an iPhone, but like, oh, everyone was having smartphones,
Yeah.
was like 2012, 2013. And you know what's interesting too, Dr. Nakumbi, is
Hmm.
that these stats are for across race, across class,
Oh.
across like, well, they do separate. She does, break down the genders,
Yeah.
but so it. Thank you, prime time, and hello, to you in the chat. But I think it's interesting, and just so people know, I'll briefly say because I could talk about this all day. That this data, she drew it from 4 databases.
Uh huh.
You've probably heard of the GSS. It's the General
Mm.
Society or General Social Survey.
Okay.
The
Yeah. Yes,
it's been since 1972, and then the
and this
American
person was
Stretch.
part of it. She did some of the research.
I Let me see.
University of Chicago. Uh, so they've been doing it for 50 years. Or what you were just saying back in the 70s. So 72.
Yeah, and one of them, another survey that she drew from, one of the databases was from 1960 something.
Hmm. But I wonder
So
why they
she
were what
has
they
so
were
much
looking
collection.
for back in the 60s and 70s that they would have thought to have this survey.
Maybe just trends. Like, well, and I think
Hmm.
and I'm sure I'd have to look over it. For example, like one of the questions is like, you know, do when did you get your license or did you get your
Mhm.
license or things like that.
Oh, okay.
So now I don't think it's so much asking about media, but I'd have to look. But it's so many answers and participants that have taken this survey.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it is interesting.
I'm trying to think what was going
Um,
on in the world, but yeah, maybe trends. Um, yeah, social change reports, projects, cross national.
and
Okay.
she is a professor of psychology
Uh huh.
at San Diego. And she's wrote a bunch of books. Like, for example, she's wrote one about millennials, Generation Me.
Uh huh.
And then, for example, the narcissism epidemic. Her research has been covered in Time, Newsweek, things like that. So she
Okay. And what's her
is
name?
very interesting. Her name is Jean Twenge. Twenge.
gene twins came up. All right. So,
Oh,
uh, how you spell the last name?
Twenge. I can put it in the back.
Oh, okay, I found it. Twain.
Okay.
Yeah, American psychologist. Yeah, see more.
Hmm.
We'll put her name up there. Um,
And do we? Sorry
so,
that I just went on and on about this. Do we want to bring up
oh yeah,
our guest?
we have again. Do you know
Yeah.
their name? Are they
Yes, her
here?
name's Mistaken. She
Mistaken. All right.
Yes, she's been on the Little Peef experience with well, she's been on there way longer than I've been on there. But she's on She Critique and The Solution. I'm sure she's been on the Sunday show for
Oh
Little
wow.
Peef Network and
Uh huh.
um but she okay, she's not here yet, but that's okay. We'll keep
Oh,
going. Oh, wait, there
okay.
she is.
Mistaken.
Hello,
All right.
Mistaken.
Hi.
Hello. Hello.
Well,
Thank you
thank
for
you
joining us.
again.
No problem. I'm excited. This is a different shift.
Yeah.
So,
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Miss Taken to the show. Thank you very much. Enjoy the broadcast.
Thank you.
thank you, CBN. So Dr. Nakumbe, I'm definitely gonna say you lead this, but mistaken for the audience and those catching the replay. Tell us a little bit about you, especially as it relates to this topic, teens and mental health.
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Okay. So I'm in going into my 22nd year of education. My my focus has been students with disabilities. So I started my background is in special education, but now I kind of shifted out of the classroom and I'm kind of working with what's called MTSS, the multi-tier system of supports for students. And so I do deal with a lot of students that may have mental health issues. I also am the 504 co-chair. So those are students who have been diagnosed with, disabilities that can be inclusive of mental health. Yeah. So that's the gist of it.
So is that I've not heard of the 504. Is that national
Yes, it's federal.
or federal?
So yeah, so it's basically under the same law as ADA, Americans with Disability Act.
Oh, yeah.
So that's just basically to protect those kids who may have an identified disability and who might
Hmm.
need some additional supports within the school in order
Okay.
to level the playing field for them.
So, but now if you would, and I can research it more, but how is that different than like the EB
The IEPs.
IEP? Thank you. Yeah, yeah, IEP. So how is that different than the IEP?
They're governed by two different laws.
Okay.
So with IEP, they're under IDEA, Individuals with Disability Education Act, and those are
Mm-hmm.
for those students who might need more specialized support in class for whatever range of the 13 categories of disability
Yeah.
that they may fall under,
Okay.
whereas 504 is more general and just kind of protect the kids more so against discrimination aspect.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So all right, discriminate, and I think the other one is more behavioral, like cover more behaviors, and maybe the 504 is more about mental illness. Is that fair to say?
No, it can
Well, the
be
IEP is ADHD too.
all of them.
Okay.
504 can cover all of basically just any kind of impairment.
Yep.
IEP, the same thing, but it's kind of more so along the lines of the severity
Yep.
of the impairment. So you can have two students that may have ADHD,
Mm-hmm.
but like is a spectrum of how those behaviors manifest.
Right.
So you might have one that can operate well with just the 504, and they just might need extended time for a test or something like that because of their focus. Whereas somebody else may have like the behavior issues. A lot of times some learning disabilities are also, linked up with the ADHD. So they may have some more profound aspects of that disability that may require more specialized support. So that's when they would transfer over to like an IEP.
Okay. Who administers? Is this a test, or like you put in the application? I mean, you have to put in an application and then be tested?
Yeah, yes and no. So for an IEP, you have to meet eligibility for it. So if you don't meet eligibility, but you still show like where the student still may need support, then they can probably qualify for a 504, even though they couldn't qualify for the IEP.
Okay. I know there's been some pushback, and I didn't work directly with school counselors as far as getting kids on IEPs and stuff like that. But part of my job was to work with students who had a plan. But there was some pushback because there were parents saying, well, it's almost like it's almost like a person who's a first responder, military, and then they go in for mental health services, and then that's attached to their record. I know a lot of parents who were wanting the plan so their student will, have a chance to be successful, but then nervous of any type of psychologist, school psychologist giving a diagnosis, usually ADHD or some type of behavioral non-compliance or can't think the one where they want to fight everything combative. But once you get that diagnosis, then they were saying like, now my kid loses a chance for certain colleges or certain universities or certain opportunities. So it's a double, yes, they get this plan, they have certain protections and they have a good chance of passing classes, but then boom, someone diagnosed them. So there's a pushback for some parents who didn't even want to get.
Yeah, the caveat to that though is if a student has a 504, when they apply to colleges, they don't have to disclose that information at all. So when they get to college though, if they will continue to need those supports, then they would have to self-disclose that they have a disability and would require the support. But that's up to, the student to decide. Right. Right. Okay. So, I mean, that's the caveat to that is because they don't, and that's the difference, I guess, in high school is because we have like what's called a child find law. So it's our responsibility to kind of try to identify those kids that may have impairments. Whereas once they graduate and move into secondary education, then it's on the individual to disclose whether or not they have the disability. So,
okay. Now, interesting you mentioned that, and thank you so much for sharing that with us.
No problem.
Because part of our conversation the last few weeks, we've been talking about how, you take this certain point in time where people were very individualized, and pretty much it was about them as a person. And now in the last number of years, we're looking at people who are going for more of the identity of a certain group or a certain culture or certain whatever. And when you were just telling me this is like, interesting, because there are certain people who now are taking pride in being part of or having associations with things just so they can say they have it. Because again, the IEP from back in the day at alternative schools, there was, it's not something that you want to be lumped in or part of or have. It wasn't something people took pride in.
Right. It was a negative connotation.
Yes.
To it. Yeah.
And so I was just wondering with this, if it's such a positive, it's like a positive thing, it's a law that protects agencies and stuff, or people from agencies from discriminating and doing different things. But then I wonder if there'll be a push for certain groups to identify with that protection more so than more so than them as the individuals. Does that make any sense? I might not be making any sense.
Um, yeah, so I think it's all in the way that it's presented.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have seen like a trend actually, I guess when it had broke on the news like a few years back where
Mm-hmm.
you had certain like I guess socioeconomic, levels where
Right.
they didn't have an issue with getting like a 504 plan to get extended time for their students because they were kind of using it in a wrong way,
Right.
for like the whole like that SAT scandal, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you had certain groups that didn't matter, right?
Right. Right.
Then you had other groups where, like what you explained, where some parents were concerned about the stigma that would
Mm-hmm.
be attached to them having, a 504 plan or IEP. But over the last few years, what I have found is that now that the mental health aspect
Yep.
is starting to be more acceptable and talked about, that
Right.
we are now starting to see a trend in people that are now seeking those things out.
Yep.
So
Now, is it
Interesting.
true that and I have very little knowledge, so please forgive me if I'm going the
no,
wrong
that's
direction.
okay. Hopefully
Is
I
it
can
true
answer
with
your questions.
yes? Is it true with this plan? One of the other concerns, the parent has limited control in what information can be accessed. So, same thing where we were talking earlier, Coach K, about how parents used to have more say so at the schools, they had more say so with their children or on what they can approve and not approve. As time went on, sexual behaviors, if they engage, they could see the school nurse or the school counselor, not have to share that information with parents. They can get contraceptive, they can get birth control. And then we move into the conversation about identity and to where there's a time when parents must give permission for certain hormone blockers and different things like that, to now agencies and schools collaborating to say, hey, you provide medical services, you provide safety, you provide protections or for these teens, even homeless or shelters that will take a kid in case you can't be at home while having these conversations. So part of this plan, from my understanding, that buzzword of, and maybe buzzword, I don't want to be insulting. So the feel good to know that there's a protection for me. I identify with a certain mental illness, and there's something that's going to help protect me. And Coach K, we've been talking about how people are in their feelings and wanting to feel safe and protected more so now than ever. And so a plan like this provides me to feel safe. But then part of it is parents have limited say so as far as what information could be put out there.
Well, no. So anything that's related to the impairment. So with a 504 or IEP, the plan is individualized to tailor
Okay.
to that student based on their specific needs.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the student that really drives what is going to be included in that plan. So
Right.
a lot of times what may happen is the student doesn't necessarily want to be involved in the plan development. And I'm speaking more along the lines of the high school,
Okay.
high school level. So typically the parents are the ones that are sitting in on the meeting and, advocating on behalf of their child. Me particularly, I like to have the child involved. Well, I'll say the youth, the young adult
Yep. Yep.
involved, only because they are the ones that are actually at school and understands what goes on with them when they're in the classroom.
Right.
And so a lot of times when we do have that feedback from the student, we can see sometimes a discrepancy between what the student is saying, what they need and want, versus what the parent is saying that they want the child to have. And so when we're making those determinations for the student to advocate for themselves, sometimes hold much more weight than what the parent says, because a lot of times we have to go based on what has been observed, what we can, support through the data. So if the student is saying, when I'm in class, I'm having a difficult time like focusing, but I know that it would help me if I sat at the front of the classroom, just kind of closer to the teacher. If I have that, that helps my focus and I'm fine. I can focus on taking my test. I can focus on a school work. I might just need the teacher to, redirect me sometimes because so they'll say that, but then a parent will say, well, no, that's not it. They also need, they start adding a bunch of stuff on. And so you'll look at the student and you can kind of see them like, no, I don't really need that. Or it can be that they may want it, but with that age, your peer group has a huge influence. And so they may not necessarily want to appear to be the student that sticks out. So it's like, if I need to have small group testing, I may not necessarily utilize that support because I don't want to be pulled out the classroom, every time I have to have a test. So,
So that's where that discrepancy is, because parents might want to have more information provided or shared. Got it. And the youth are, okay, cool. Thank you.
No problem.
That's probably more than what you plan to talk about, but I wanted to use that as an example of a tool, again, from my very little understanding, but a tool that's available to a population of youth where parents may feel like, how much say do we have in this? And then the information that's recorded, how much of that do we want out there or have say so? And then it becomes part of their permanent record. So how much do I want out there? Because I think a number of parents still believe that it reflects on them. If something's wrong with their child or the child has an illness or whatever, it reflects on like, we had a bad child, we messed up, or so.
Well, I think the other thing too that I have faced is, which, I don't know if you guys have spoken on this previously, is that sometimes like we also have moved into a stage of, I don't know what the proper term is in your profession, but like the coddling or overprotection, whereas the parents will come in and have like a myriad of supports and things that they're like, okay, they've been diagnosed, and these are the suggested accommodations that the psychologist said, and so they're looking to have like every single one of those, not necessarily understanding that the psychologist listed these as a recommended accommodation. Right. Not necessarily that this is what the child needs. They do it based on the diagnosis. So they'll say, oh, somebody with this diagnosis, they may need this, and this. So it's very generic. Whereas when we're looking at the total picture of all of the data that we have, we're making our decisions based on, okay, these are the signs and symptoms that we see that are manifest and related to this disability. So these are the supports that we'll choose to accommodate or address that. And so the parents will get upset because they think, well, I gave you this report, and everything in this report they're supposed to have, not really understanding that, we have to look at the total picture. So
it's almost like the individual, sometimes in these cases, and I'm not speaking, this is the truth for everyone. I always want to be careful, so I might be like tiptoeing, but to be on the safe side. But it's almost like if someone does have a diagnosis, and I'm not really speaking on like behavioral stuff as much, but it's like this, and Dr. Nakumbe, we've talked about this almost as like, so if and this is for adults especially, but if I have this diagnosis, then whatever I do with my behavior, that's just what it is. But Dr. Nakumbe and I have talked about how, okay, but there's still things that need to, like, you still have to participate in your, your care, your treatment, or your therapy, or even like your schoolwork. Like, it's like and I don't know if you see this, but you have these, accommodations, but we still want you to be participating and
Absolutely.
taking responsibility, even if you have this diagnosis. It's almost like the diagnosis is now the individual
Right.
versus the individual themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so sometimes, like I said, we'll see the gamut in terms of where you'll have a situation where you have a student that is very comfortable with advocating for what it is that they need. I love meetings like that
Mm-hmm.
because they make it very easy to identify what it is that they need, because they're like, this is what happens, this is what I see in a lot, or experience in a lot of times, based on the feedback and input from the teachers who have them in that class. You will see that what they're saying is like in alignment. So you know that, okay, this is what the student's saying is aligning what the teacher has observed, and based on the other data that we have is in alignment.
Mm-hmm.
And so I definitely prefer a student being more self-aware
Mm-hmm.
of their needs, because once they are aware, then when we're having meetings like this, they can be their own best advocate.
Right.
So
Right.
but then sometimes I have parents that's like, well, they're uncomfortable, or they don't like when we talk about, the disability. So I
Right.
really not have them here. But then I'll have to have the conversation with a parent that even if they're not present, it's very important for you to review what is in the 504 so they can better advocate for themselves when they're in class.
Right.
Because you may have a teacher, I mean, they have 30 kids in a class, you might have 5 or 6 kids that have a 504 plan, and on those plans, it may be something that's a little different. So
Mm-hmm.
it's possible that at times they may forget.
Right.
But
Right.
if the student is aware of what's in their plan, they only have to remember their own, and they
Yeah.
may be able to advocate and say, mistaken, I am supposed to have, extended time on my test. I didn't get a chance to finish.
Mm-hmm.
Can I stay here extra, 10 minutes so I can get it done,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so I have to reiterate to parents, like, I understand, the parenting thing, we're going to protect our kids, but in this situation, it's very important that they are aware of their impairment,
Yeah.
how that impairment affects them, and identify what things that they would need to help support them with
Yeah.
that impairment.
Yep.
So that
I,
that is very important.
I remember many youth who are saying, I don't know what's on my plan. Like to the teacher, well, aren't I on some plan, or I'm gonna have my mama call you because you're not following the plan, but they didn't even know what the plan was,
Right.
for those IEPs and stuff like that.
Yes.
And parents who are driving that, the kids are not even at those meetings sometimes. So, and in our chat, we have a beautiful animator who said, I encourage my daughter to advocate for herself, to know what her needs and wants are, and to be able to speak to that. So then it's not
Mhm.
really about what my mom said, more than is more I feel, I want, I need. And I think
Yes.
people take more ownership. You take more ownership of, if you're saying, hey, this is what I need, it's more likely that it's a plan that you'll be more willing to follow, versus my parents said I have to, or my parents said this is wrong with
Right. Being totally transparent, my son, and he doesn't mind that I talk about it because he has no issue with it,
me.
just because of the way that I guess we've conditioned him. Is that he had an IEP when he was in school. He had ADHD to the point that it did impact, his learning.
Mm.
And from the very beginning, we never made his ADHD a something to be ashamed of, right?
Mm.
It was a matter of, he had the ADHD, but then he also had a specific learning disability in math. And I know he gets that from me because I do have dyscalculia. So I know that he probably got that from me.
Right.
So it was never anything for him to be ashamed of. We didn't make it a shame thing. It was more along the lines of, you just learn differently. You know, everybody has their strengths and their weaknesses, and your weakness happens to be in math, you know, and your weaknesses with the ADHD. This is just like if somebody had diabetes and they have low insulin and they need certain things to boost their insulin, right?
Yeah.
And so we just from an early age, we explained it was never a stigma. So he sat in his IEP meetings even when he was in elementary.
Nice.
Even if he didn't even know what was really going on, it was like a matter of, I want you to get used to being in practice of being there for yourself, you know. And so as he got older, he was like, Ma, I no longer want to take the medication. I don't like the way it makes me feel. And it was like, okay, all right, so what is going to be your game plan? Because, you know, when you're not on it, it's a little difficult. So what is going to be the game plan going forward? What are some strategies that you can use that's going to help you focus? So it was kind of putting it back on him, like, yes, you're older now. You have more say so over your agency, but we just can't say or allow you to just say, I'm not going to do it anymore without having some kind of planning in place to accommodate what you know is going to be a challenge for you.
Smart. I like that. I like that.
We did have a question for you, Ms. Taken. Is that if the 504 has to be reassessed every year, or is it ongoing for the time the child is in school?
Okay, so you have what's called an annual review and then a redetermination meeting. So an annual review is like, well, once the student gets the 504 in place, every year it's reviewed just because needs may change. You may find that there are accommodations that the student didn't even use. So we'll reassess it and say, okay, let's just take it off because this isn't something that they need. Or we may find that there may be something that they do need that, you know, we need to add to it. So it's typically always reviewed each year. But every 3 years at the reevaluation, or what they call the redetermination meeting, is when they then go through the process of redetermining if they still meet eligibility. Because you have some impairments that are not lifelong impairments. Or you may have some impairments that are intermittent, you know, things like that. So if they are intermittent, it can be like, you know, we've had students who have had cancer, but they're in remission. And so at the reevaluation, you'll get all of their paperwork together. And then if they're still in remission, they can still meet eligibility for 504 because we don't know if it's going to come back. But the accommodations that they may need may have to be removed at that point because right now it's in remission. So there's still a protected only, you know, status where they may not need accommodations. And then if it comes back, then we would go ahead and re-add whatever those accommodations may need. So there's an annual review and then a re-evaluation that occurs every 3 years.
I like that. You know, now speaking of review, and part of one of the questions we wanted, or questions or issues we wanted to address tonight, there are some things that just go on and on and on, or we treat people as if they still have this problem. And sometimes when that problem has either been minimized or resolved, parents still operate as if it's going to be a problem, either based on assumptions or history or belief, or any of these things that say, no, I know how you are. You're going to end up doing this. You're going to end up doing that. And it becomes this kind of accusatory relationship. And then I just want to ask, what would you say in your experience or what you've come across are some of the top, if you were to name three, what would be the top three issues that parents are stating or that you hear they're having problems or feeling overwhelmed about with their teens?
Um, I would say one, having a difficult time transitioning from, I guess, the elementary, middle school level type of parenting to by the time they get to high school type of parenting. So I typically see maybe two extremes where you'll have a parent that's still trying to parent like the young adult is still in elementary.
Right.
Or it will be along the lines of the student being in high school and now the parent totally dropping off. Like, okay, you're in high school now, you should know what to do. You're older now, I shouldn't have to walk you through a bunch of stuff. So they're kind of on their own. So I've kind of seen those two extremes where you do have the student that is saying, yes, I know, I need to be more independent, but I still need help.
Yeah.
And they're not necessarily knowing how to ask for that help from their parent, or the parent is just kind of like, I did my job, I just needed to get you to high school, right? Or you have the other extreme where the student is screaming, I need you to leave me alone. Let me figure things out. And the parent doesn't know how to let go. And so I've seen students literally have like anxiety when the parent is participating in the meeting and they're trying to advocate for themselves, but the parent is trying to advocate for them on their behalf.
Right.
So I've seen students like literally get into it with their parent. And then the parent gets upset, like, see, this is the kind of behavior that I'm referring to. But then you'll look at all of the information from like the teachers, the feedback and the behaviors that the parent is saying that they see at home with the student doesn't align with what the teachers are saying that they see in class. And you're like, I kind of see why you're having these issues at home.
Right. It's starting to make sense now.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
And so, so I would say that's one of either over parenting or under parenting at that level. Another thing is parents really not knowing how to engage with their young adult anymore. And I think they struggle with that because they do want to be there as a support, but don't necessarily know how.
Yeah.
And sometimes the impairment becomes the thing to try to, I guess, wedge that relationship. So I would say that would be the second thing. And the third thing, let me see. What else do they say that they struggle with the most? I would also say that sometimes the parents are the ones that are actually causing the anxiety on I would say the academic side, because they are pushing the student to excel. And so I've had parents where the student is doing well, but the parents are saying they're not reaching their fullest potential. So I believe that because they have this impairment, that they need additional support, because I know he has a B in his class, but he or she is really an A student.
Right.
And I need them to have this extra time because it'll help alleviate their stress. But when you look at their schedule, the schedule would show things like they have all like AP classes, advanced placement classes. So these are college level classes while they're in high school, or honors classes. And then they're in the beta club, but then they also are on the basketball team, and they are doing volunteer work outside of school. And so what they're trying to do is try to make them this well-rounded student, but the student doesn't have any time to just be.
Right.
So their schedule, yes, is just filled up, and they're on this go, 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 go all day long. They, at that age, you want time with your friends. You just want some time to just be free, but at the same time, you're not wanting to let your parents down. And so now you've created this anxiety where it's like, if I just say I don't want to, do basketball anymore, how is that going to make my mom or dad react? Or if I say, you know what, I'll rather not even do AP. I'll just rather just do regular classes where I'm not stressed out. And parents just don't want to hear that, because for them it's so competitive. Like, I have to give you the best edge, the best advantage. So sometimes I would say that that's kind of the third problem too, is just this push to excel in everything, but not necessarily allowing the student to kind of develop the things that they enjoy doing.
Okay. And I see we have a question from T-Shaw, which we'll get to in a second. I just wanted to say, with this point, there's been reports that in addition to stress levels going up for adolescents, there's also an increase in wanting to delete themselves. I don't know if you've heard about that or have seen that, but would you say part of that pressure of maintaining this status, this needing to be the best I can be, either following family tradition, dad was a doctor, mom was a lawyer, X, Y, and Z, and I have to do that, or they weren't either of these, but now I have more opportunity than they had, and so now I'm expected. So out of that pressure to excel, out of that belief that there's major chaos or major letdown or disappointment, have you seen any trends or heard about trends where teens are feeling like self-deletion is maybe the answer?
Absolutely. Just over the last few years, I would say, for me, since maybe 2018 up until now, that we've seen a huge increase in diagnosis of depression, anxiety. Those have been the top two. And then in terms of the those who have attempted to delete themselves have also increased, where they are literally missing school because they have been taken out and put in therapeutic centers because of that, to address those issues. And then when they come back to school, we have to have an emergency plan put in place for them because of that. So yes, we have definitely seen a trend in that.
Okay. Thank you. That question, and just to bring you up to speak, Coach K, we were talking about how some of the parents, so those three things, kind of the most heard pressures, or wanting the kids to excel and be the best that they can be. The kid already has teen already has a caseload, or a learning, caseload. Like, I already have my classes, my studies, extracurricular activities, this expectation to really excel. And so I was asking, reports, research, records are stating that the self-deletion rate is going higher and higher. Now, some of that's been contributed to or tied to, again, the feelings and wanting to identify in a different way. And if people feel like they can't do that, self-deletion was the answer. And so I was asking with these students, do they ever feel like self deletion is the answer to I can't keep up, I can't meet your expectations, I can't do this, and or I don't even have a voice to challenge that with my parents, because again, I don't want to disappoint, I don't want to get them angry, or the outcome I don't know if I can handle. So that's what we were talking
That
about.
I gotcha.
Hmm.
Something that I saw and I know is prevalent too is not only the online bullying, but bullying just in general, and that sometimes being a contributor to that deletion as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
Do you see that a lot, mistaken as far as just the bullying?
Yes, that has definitely occurred. I've seen, students with like things that have been on Snapchat that I've been shown, with the bullying and things like that. So that has been, but I think the biggest issue is, which is very different, I guess, than when I grew up, because we didn't have social media, and access to somebody 24 hours a day, in a sense. Um,
Hmm.
but I think what also happens is that we don't invest a lot of times in teaching our kids along the lines of knowing how to navigate life a little bit, in terms of, not if the bully hits you, you better hit the back. Like not that kind of stuff, but more along the lines of knowing how to stand up for yourself, or knowing how to overcome adversity, knowing how to pivot when things may not necessarily be going your way, teaching them how to persevere. Like a lot of times, as what I've seen more so is the parents standing in the way of that development, teaching them those skills to navigate, bullying, or navigating when I'm feeling overwhelmed, what things that I need to do, like finding that balance. Because sometimes too, I remember being a teen, that sometimes we look for the easiest way out. Like if we
Hmm.
would rather not, so we'll have more time to spend with our friends, versus our ability to really do something. So I do
Hmm.
think it's important for parents to push their kids, but not to the point where it becomes where you're to the point where, like, I'm ready to delete myself because I can't keep up, I can't maintain this level
Mhm.
of academic, stress, plus try to look my best and feel my best when I'm around my peers, because I may not have the same clothes, I may not have the same, things. And then I'm trying to play sports on top of that. And then you want me to be a
Mm,
straight student, and I want some time where I can just chill with my friends. And, so the list goes on and
right.
on. So I just think it's very important for parents to be a part of their kids' lives and help them navigate, and teach them how to balance, things. Because when you become adults, that's what you have to do. You have to go to work, but you still want time where you're able to go out with your friends on the weekend and hang out. But, learning how to prioritize those things and
Hmm.
how to manage
Right.
your time in general, so you can, have a
Right.
work-life balance. Yeah.
It seems like parents sometimes, it just feels easier if they would just do it for them or something like that. But and it might, and I could already tell that it would hurt. I don't have any kids, but it would hurt me too to just like watch them kind of like figure it out. Like, like, oh, there's a better way. But when you let them kind of fall a little bit, or get naturally frustrated, because that's a thing too that I see a lot with my clients. And I don't know where they get it, but not that it matters, but kind of being unhappy that they're not happy all the time, or that they're stressed or they're overwhelmed, or someone's saying things about them, and it's like their world is ending, and it's like, oh well, this is actually okay. Like sometimes we do want to feel this way,
Hmm.
um and they just don't know how to handle those things. Those just natural
Right.
humans can be jerks.
Failing,
Yeah.
failing forward, right? So that's
Right.
kind of the idea of learning how to allow your kids to fail, but the key is the learning process that comes along with that. So I failed. What could I have done better to prevent this? So the next time I'm in this scenario, that I have strategies and a game plan to prevent it from happening again. And
Hmm.
so definitely, yeah. The like even for me, my husband had to get on me one time because I'm like, trying to help my son, like, no, we're not gonna let you fail. And he like was like, listen, you're doing more work than he
Yeah,
is
he is.
for his own right. And so he was just like, I know you're an educator. I know you're just like in that, like, we're gonna, he was like, if he fails, you have to allow him because sometimes that's the only way that you'll learn. And then in having that conversation with my son, he actually admitted, a lot of times I don't do things because I know you're going to take care of it for me.
Mm.
Once he confirmed that, I said, I have to back off. And he failed. And the consequence was, because I told him I will never pay for summer school. I will never pay for anything that you're given for free. And so if you fail your class, your money that you
It's
have been
on you.
saving so you
Yeah.
can go away for the summer. He was supposed to go away to New York and stay with his, aunt. And he failed the class.
Mhm.
I forewarned him, if you fail, you won't be going. And the money that you saved, I will use that to pay for you to make up that credit.
Mhm.
And it took him that one time to fail. It never happened again. So
Mhm.
sometimes it is allowing those natural consequences to occur for them to get it, as opposed to always wanting to jump in and come to the rescue.
Mhm. Now, and T. Shaw, I will see your question, and I'm still planning to get to it. Just is a little different from this conversation, and we see there's another question also about throwing hands. But to Mistaken and Coach K, I'm that parent that says and Coach K, we were just talking about this about the technology, and I don't want to. We didn't use the word ease, but compared to what we had an encyclopedia or had to go pick up a dictionary, you have Google. So how is it that my kid or this teen is having so many problems? Now I talk about matching stimuli because I'm talking as a 30-year-old, 40-year-old. Can a 30-year-old have a teenager? Yeah, they can have one. Yeah, they can now. His grandma's
I
a 30.
mean,
Um,
yeah.
so I'm this 30-year-old,
Oh, yeah.
40-year-old, 50-year-old that's matching my fear of failure. We go higher in age, my fear of
Mm.
what does life look like if I'm a failure or don't have, or if we don't succeed. What does my next generation or my family seed, what does that look like if they fail? A lot of people don't take that stimuli, but that you're looking at it through a 40-year-old lens
Mhm.
and then placing that responsibility onto the team. But to both of you, what do you say to that parent who's pulling yourself up by the bootstraps? We had it way worse than you did, or the stuff you're crying about or complaining about, or the stuff that you feel stressed about doesn't quite match what we have. So I have very little capacity or tolerance for your complaint slash, through my lens, laziness.
Mhm.
I would say first that the circumstances are neutral as far as
Mm.
they didn't have. Well, I'm trying to think of how I want to speak about this. I'll just speak about me. If let's say I'm talking to my kid or something. Well,
Mhm.
no, because I'm too close. my dad would say, and he would say that, like, "Oh well, I had to walk to school in the snow. We didn't have book
Uphills,
covers."
both ways.
Yeah. Remember the book covers, like the really nice stretchy ones? Like those were
Mhm.
a luxury in my family. So he'd be
Yeah.
like, my mom, or yeah, my mom, so
With the
my grandma,
paper
my
bag
mom, yep,
or
you
newspaper,
already know.
cover it.
We
Yeah.
didn't have book bags or whatever.
The brown paper bag.
But
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
right. So see, I'm already being kind of like biased by the way I'm talking about it. But I would say to that, I'll say to that parent, not my dad, but to that parent, well, and my dad technically, but that's neutral. Like that teenager or your teenager, that doesn't matter because this isn't the same time. Now, I
Right.
could empathize with that parent. Yeah, it might seem easier for you, but you can see both worlds. This child, your teenager, this is their world. So
Mm,
what good is it to compare to something that's not reality right now? You know what I mean?
right.
That's where I would start the
Yeah. Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. They're speaking from a perspective of hindsight,
Mhm.
where
Mhm.
this the teen doesn't have that yet. So
Mhm.
I know just in situations, I can say as a parent, I have been guilty of that. But I think I've also created a balance between that by sharing what I did. It wasn't a matter
Mm.
of just saying, well, you guys get to have these stretchy book covers. And, I didn't,
Yeah.
didn't care. It was more along the lines of like, well, yeah, we didn't have these, but what we had to do was X, Y, and Z,
Mhm.
and kind
Mhm.
of share
Mhm.
additional information. I think a lot of times we try to present this image to our children that we've always had it together,
Yeah.
right? Um,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so a lot of times they look at us like, put us on this pedestal, like we know everything,
Mhm.
and not necessarily understanding that, well, we've gotten to where we are because we've already been through what you've been through and have
Mhm.
gained the knowledge
Right.
from that.
Mhm.
And so a
And
lot of
yeah.
my husband and I, our conversations with our kids were a lot of times around that. Like, we
Mhm.
remember how it was at your age. And at your age, I'm not going to lie, we did X, Y, and Z just like you.
Mhm.
But these are some of the consequences that occurred because of that,
Right.
right? So
Right.
we want you to not have to go through what we went through,
Right.
right? So it can be those conversations, or I know my parents told me not to do X, Y, and Z. And guess what I did? I did X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
But if
Mhm.
you're going to do it better. This is how you need to, if you're
Mm.
going to do X, Y, and Z,
Mhm.
prepare yourself by doing taking
Mhm.
necessary precaution and steps,
Mhm.
to read between the lines. Um, so
Mhm.
things like that. So having those open and honest conversations,
Right.
I find are very important. And not
Mhm.
only that, it helps you combat some of the misinformation that they're being bombarded with
Yep.
through social media and other means, through friends,
Yep.
things like that. So,
Okay. So here's the counter to that. And I like what you said, Coach K, about really, because what I heard Miss Taken say, I could utilize your approach of it really cancels each other out, because what you did at that time, our version of it might look different, might sound different, might be different, but it's equal, as in you walk to school uphill both ways, but I have to do X, Y, and Z, which is equal to this. So it's really a neutral zone if we're comparing, right? And how
mhm.
you
Mhm.
did it as a parent, you did it with whatever resources you had available to you back in your time, and I'm doing it with what resources I have in my time.
But the
Which then leads
experience
me,
is the same.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. But now I'm going to lead to, but your endurance, your capabilities of managing, and that's where I hear you mistaken saying, what is the lesson in it? Like, how are we learning from it? How are
Mhm.
you building from it? How are you
Mm.
becoming stronger, smarter, wiser, a better problem solver, a better critical thinker. And if you see them as the same, or you feel as neutral, or you even feel you can, or that I'm being too harsh, do it better than I did. You know, whatever that X, Y, and Z is, do it better so you have better outcomes. So then here's the challenge. I have social media. I have, I may not have all these accounts, but I'm just going to name a few. So let's say there's an Snapchat influence, Twitter influence, Instagram influence, TikTok influence, Facebook, and a few others. But for sure, we have 5. And again, not everyone has all 5. I'm just naming some. But when I talk about influences, so now I named 5 platforms, but there's, heck, if I just say 100 people per platform, that's 500 times the influencer energy, mom, dad, if I have that. So why is it that you get to be more right than all of this over here? And last piece, could you now understand why my frustration with you is so intense? Because how can you expect me to follow this kind of limited, even though you've been there, but old-fashioned, limited, or very intelligent, very smart, very useful, but it doesn't match. If it doesn't match what the people say, how is that going to reflect on me? What does it say about my image and me as a person with this influence? What do you say to that?
I want to share really quick. It reminds me of my 8-year-old. Well, she can be 8 this summer. Her hair was, her stepmom did her hair like it almost looked like a dinosaur. Like all these like honestly, like all these like ponytails like down
Yeah.
her head. And my twin sister, her mom said, you shouldn't sleep in it. It's not good for your head, your hair. And my niece says, how do you know?
Right.
And and my twin Erin, she was like, "Oh, that's a good question." I'm like, "Erin, first of all, you shouldn't even feel like you need that. She could be right. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
you just tell her because I said so." But I don't have kids. But anyway, I could see a theme there. A similar theme with the teens saying, "Well, how do you know?" And I've seen that, especially just watching people online, the young people, and how all about the evidence. They're all about, this and that. But anyway, I'll let Miss Sagan go first. I gotta gather my thoughts.
And I would say in some circumstances, I give credit where credit is due. Like there's going to be some things that I cannot relate to because I never did. Right.
Okay.
So for instance, like when I was younger, I never did drugs. That's just something like being in the area that I grew up in, seeing the people who were on drugs had created such a fear in me that I never wanted to be like that. So I never dabbled, never played, never. But what I find now in this generation is that is something that is very acceptable and not necessarily limited to just, weed. Like they're more exploratory with a bunch of different stuff. So being able to have that conversation, to be honest, they would be teaching me in that regard, just because I never personally had that experience. But I can say, well, even though I didn't do it, the experience that I've seen is when I was growing up, these people that did X, Y, and Z, this is the outcome that they had. And I want to protect you from that,
Okay.
But I've experienced. So what I find is that the players may change, but the game is still the same. So even if my peer pressure came from maybe just limited to the peers that I had in my school and in my neighborhood versus the peer pressure you may feel from the 5 different platforms. At the end of the day, You may say, well, I have 500 people that are peer pressuring me. And I
Right.
might say, I only have 100 people that are peer pressuring me.
Right.
The way that we act upon that will still be the same. So
Mm-hmm.
the
Right.
question is,
Mm.
what tools, strategies do I
Right.
need to equip myself with to overcome peer pressure? So
Right.
whether it's 500 people or 100 people,
Right.
my strategy is still going to be the same.
Yeah. And I
So,
like that. And that ties in
Yeah.
again, Coach K, what you were saying about the canceling each other out and
Mm-hmm.
mistaken when you're talking about whatever it is, what is the skill that we can take away, or what is the method that we should use to address probably, I don't want to say the most important, because this peer pressure, also known as peer influence, could be highly significant.
Mm-hmm.
But please understand, 500 to my 100, both of us still dealt with the level of significance or pressure or influence. How do you come out of that?
mhm.
So I want to add a question that was from the group, and Trey said in the chat here that you might have the 500, but based on the reduction of that, so Wi-Fi access, social media access, permissions to have certain accounts. I don't know for sure which one of these, but a few of these accounts, you have to still be a certain age limit. So
Right.
there are a few ways that parents can actually cap some of this. So where you might believe all 500 people see it your way, if we took that source away, then what do you really have? In fact, of those 500, which ones are truly your like true friends? So then here's the question I'm stealing from the chat here. What if I felt so cheated or robbed of this experience? And the same way you bring your parental passion, I bring my defensiveness, and not that I want to abuse someone, but Coach K, we were talking about how uh, problem solving and learning like how to really resolve problems have been reduced based on some of the reading you were doing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I go to my emotions first about
Right.
how I feel because I don't have the skill sets, right? What was it, Coach
Oh,
iGen,
Gen Z.
or
Yeah, or iGen.
right?
Yeah.
So the iGen population, uh, the research says that they learn less how to critical think. So now,
Mm-hmm.
but my point is, out of my emotional state, I go hands on because as a defense, would that be and on the surface of that question seems like would it be okay to put your hands? But I'm really talking from a matching your passion. Like if you got in my way of saying no, you can't leave this house, or give me your phone, or whatever that
Uh,
passion is as a parent, if I met that with hands-on resistance, what do you think about that?
you're saying like the teen is hands-on, or the parent would be
Yeah,
hands-on.
I think I think it was
Was
the
it
youth
CBN?
in the question. I think it was the question for the youth. I think. Oh, it's a question for
Oh.
mistaken.
Oh.
Is there a
Yeah.
time when it's okay for a kid to throw hands to defend themselves? And I kind of, I shaped that question a little bit to give
Yeah.
it some reason, to give it some.
Can I? Oh, sorry. Can I answer? Well, I wanted to add a little bit to the previous question and maybe tie it in, but you know how they consider everything's like concentrated now,
Mm-hmm,
like microwavable, it's all quick, there's
mm-hmm,
high sugar, like everything's
mm-hmm,
just instant, whatever. Because it's so concentrated and we get so much,
mm-hmm,
I think that's going to require, because now since it's so easy and accessible, it requires, as an adult, a lot of discipline and motivation or just decision making, whatever, to combat that. I
right,
mean, you have to, otherwise you're going to be unhealthy and all the rest. I think that that's going to require, unfortunately, parents and whoever to make their guidance even more concentrated to kind of like match that. You know what I mean? Especially
mm-hmm,
with, because of all the influence and the peer pressure, and which is really unfortunate because my mind is already offering me Yeah, and parents aren't there as much as they used to be too. So it's like double whammy, like
Mm-hmm.
crap. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, I'll let Miss Taken answer this question about the hands-on. Like, what did CBN say? Putting. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I'll
So
let her
so BMU was asking,
answer.
yeah, if is it okay if the kid goes hands on
It depends on, I would say, the scenario. And what
to
I mean,
defend themselves?
to defend themselves in, I would say, in this, using your situation, I'm gonna absolutely say no. There's no, in terms
Mm-hmm.
of parent, like them getting frustrated that the parent took the phone away from them and trying to,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
no, that absolutely not. But
Right.
in a situation where you are being bullied,
Mm-hmm.
you've already taken the necessary steps to, like, the first time it happened, you went to the teacher, nothing
Mm-hmm.
happened. Then it happens again, you go to the principal or what have you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or it happens again, and then you come to me as a parent. At some point, you don't want to reinforce the bad behavior of the bully by making yourself a target, because the bully knows that there is no consequence to them, doing what they're.
Mm.
So at some point, I would say yes. You may have to throw hands.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
for me, again, I don't know if, well, yeah, I do know. A level of influence of that is because of the way of where I grew up as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing that firsthand, where people got picked on, and then they forever got picked on if they didn't stand up for themselves, or
Right.
they linked up with somebody who can stand in place for them to take up for them.
Yeah.
So one of those two things would happen. And so that's how sometimes you see kids that end up in gangs and things
Mm-hmm.
like that, because
Mm-hmm.
they're trying to associate themselves with a group that can provide them with protection from someone else,
Right.
right? Or
Now,
avoid.
yeah. In
So,
certain groups, I don't want to say I I don't want to really get into ethnic groups, but I do want to say certain school cultures. Is it fair to say those who don't defend themselves, may not stick up to bullying, who feel this sense of pressure, teasing, and all these type of things? When we hear about the school issues with people bringing weapons
mhm.
and
Mm.
responding, would it be fair to say the question isn't if it's okay to do it that way? I wonder if those are the kids that didn't take opportunity to learn how to be assertive, to learn how to protect themselves, stand up for themselves, to say they're not okay with things, and then to reach a certain point. They say I had it up to here. It's nice if we can learn when we had it up to here. They
Mhm.
had it up to here,
Mm.
and then they respond in a certain way. Now, these are minus the cases where it was related to their teacher was a mother. Is We're not talking about the adult that goes back to the school. We're talking about the
Mhm.
kids who feel like I can no longer take this, and my response to this is to do that.
Mhm.
Almost that self-advocacy too, you
Mhm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah.
goes along with what we were talking about earlier.
But it
Mm-hmm.
goes to what you were saying too, as well, Coach K, in regards to parents parenting. So
Mhm.
I don't think you can teach that once the kid gets in high school, right?
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Like, I think that has to be something that's ongoing from early on,
Mm-hmm.
because if if because they're going to need time to practice being assertive. They're going to need time to practice addressing situations where it makes them feel uncomfortable, or when somebody is trying to force them to do things that they don't want to do. That though all of that youth from K all the way up to 12, from kindergarten, you should be reinforcing and teaching. If somebody does, tells you to do something you don't want to do,
Mm-hmm.
this is what you need to say. This is what you say.
Mm-hmm.
If it's an
Mhm.
adult, you say it like this. If it's a kid that's your age, you say it like this, because
Yeah.
to adults a little differently than we speak to our peers,
Yeah.
things like that. So those are the messages and providing models of that to them when they're young. So as they get older, it becomes more easier or more familiar, should I say, with them in how to do those things.
How to respond. So some of the true, if I'm hearing you, are you saying some of the true, the foundational morals, values would really be the things that kick in? I mean, you have your rare responses, but the true core values that they learn at a younger age should kick in later. Is that fair to say?
Right. And I know for me, the difference too is weird. Like where I grew up, it was a lot of, just negativity going on outside the household in regards to like fighting and drugs and, that kind of scene. But in my household, it was, I would say I was in the hood, but I wasn't of the hood because my life inside our apartment was where we had, which I understand that I was privileged to have grown up with both of my parents based on, stats for African Americans, that I had both of my parents. They were both working parents, and we stayed in church most of the days out of the week, so we were getting a foundation that had, I guess, a bigger influence that by the time we left outside the house, even though we were exposed to things and may not necessarily have followed everything that we were taught, we had enough foundation to kind of limit some of that engagement that could have happened. And so that's why I say being involved with your kids early on is most important, because that's when they develop a lot of those foundational skills to handle things later on as they get older.
Yeah.
And Dr. Nakumbe, that's where you come in.
Yeah, I was about to say.
I'm like, please, because that's my question for you, Dr. Nakumbe. And sorry for cutting you off. I want you to continue. But like, what do we do for people with teens and myself later on or whatever that weren't taught those foundational like principles? Because you see it all the time.
And,
what would you say?
I want to answer that. I wanted to add one more twist to this and really stealing, snatching another question from the chat. I learned. One of you said, "What happens when there's the youth kind of outgrows the parent, and not just in height, but Dad used to want to show you a magic trick and tickle, and." And now as a teenager, it's still like, want to see a magic trick? Like that's kind of, and then the kid outgrows me, like intelligence, like or the way they do math compared to the way we did math. So my frustration as a parent, and maybe a situation where it may not actually be about the situation, but my sense of control, because you have some air in your chest, or she's a woman now, whatever the case may be, but you outgrew the parent. And the parent's way of feeling like they get their power back is to probably have to step to you to let some of that air out your chest, take some of the weave off, or whatever the case is, to help you kind of level the playing field. So one of the questions, if you are of that mentality that no, I'm still the boss here, I'm still the parent here, I will lay you out. If you're of that mentality, and not even talking, sometimes it's not even a talk. You just see the kid after going, right? But then the question is, in fair play, would it be okay for the hands to come from the youth, as in saying, I will be respected? Pending the time, there was a time or a culture that says it doesn't feel good, but if your parents had to go hands-on, that meant business, and that was the end of it. But now, again, based on my feelings, based on beliefs and practices, that says, no, you have a right to protect yourself. Is that fair game? That if your parent puts hands on you past that certain age, not the outgrowing, but past that certain age, in public, they snatch you, hit you, whatever, is that fair game?
Well, I think there's a difference between fear-based parenting and respect-based parenting. So I think if you have a fear-based style of parenting where every time a kid does something wrong, you spank them or, beat them or what have you, at some point, when you're younger, you're scared of that, right? And so that helps keep you in line. But once you get a certain age, you're no longer afraid of that. And so now, how does that work? So that's why I have been very big on the respect-based parenting, because no matter how old you get, if I respect you, I would never think to put my hands on you, right? Even if I know I can beat you up, I just would not do. Like, I have a brother who's 6'11". When we were growing up, he was in high school, he was like 6'8". Now, there's no way that my mother would be able to handle him, right? But he never tried her, not because he didn't know he could beat her. It was a matter of, I respect her. So I would want to protect her. As siblings, we would go at it, but, but with him, with like I said, with my mom or what have you, one time with my dad, he almost got into it with my dad, but I don't know if that's normal for boys, men and their dads, they have a different dynamic. But, just in terms of my parents' parenting style, we got spanked, but it was a balance between spanking and knowing that it was a consequence as opposed to it being you get on my nerves, and, like that kind of stuff, or out of anger. It was, I cannot recall a spanking that was necessarily out of anger. It was like we knew it was coming. We used to hate it when we were younger. My dad would prep us for it, and you're spending all of this time where you're like, oh, it's gonna come. So it was never out of immediate anger. It was like, if you get used on your report card, that was for, behavior. If you get unsatisfactory in behavior, like that was just as bad as getting an F for a grade, and when report cards would come, I mean, I was the youngest girl child, so I was the rebellious one. And, I knew what was coming. I already knew the consequence. So it was never a situation where I didn't know what to expect. You know what I mean? So, and that's what I mean by like the respect-based parenting versus the fear-based. So,
I think some parents, when they express that fear base, it's almost a given. Like they don't actually speak to the respect part of it. I think that part of it is considered a given. I mean, we have abusive parents who, that respect part is not part of it. But when I'm talking about snatching my kid or a quick karate chop to the throat, it's kind of unspoken that the opposite side of that is the love and compassion and the sacrifice that I put in for those kids. And there's not a justification for the hit or the grab or the snatch. It's just that I know the parents who I talk to, depending the regions that they're in, different parts of the country, different parts of the different cultures, where your neighbors used to be able to snatch the kids. The teachers used to be able to, say, yeah, I'm going to tell your parent, or even before your parent comes, I'm going to handle this. So I think a lot of those parents, I just want to capture what you two are saying. At some point, there's the natural development to where, when does it turn into a look? There are people at 6, 7 years old, the parent is not even not using their hands at all anymore. It's just a look. So how do you transition
That was my dad.
this fear, but still have it just in a different way, but not fear, have an understanding or a respect. So then it doesn't have to be sort of that hands on.
Mhm.
Using those analogies and then answering from my perspective, working with parents, I, I take time to remind parents that as much as what you're saying that you didn't want to do, we have to be careful. You may have been influenced to where you're doing it anyway. So I'll give you an example. A parent told me the other day they were abused physically and they absolutely refuse to put their hands on the kids because they don't want the kids afraid of them. And this is how they handle issues. At 6 o'clock, we have dinner, phones off, phones away. And what if they don't hand you the phone? They know when my voice gets to a certain point that I mean business. So, just devil's advocate, what if your voice got to the business part and they didn't respond the way you wanted to? Oh, I get that all the time. I just go and snatch the phone.
That's kind of
Yeah. But but
physical,
what's
right?
the difference?
A little
Because
bit.
remember we were talking about canceling, not canceling. What were we saying? Neutral. You got,
Yeah.
you two were talking about neutral. Well, I think that's a neutral spot where physical, that parent that was abused was afraid of the parent. This one, even though they're not handing over the phone, so it doesn't sound like the fear is there. But when I hear the parents say, when I raise my voice, they know, or I'll just go
Good
and take the phone.
point.
But I mentioned to them that they may not be getting the results that they want, and they can probably reduce half of that stress if they didn't go take the phone. Because when you have to go over to the kid to take the phone, well, that's still a sense of not being heard, not being listened to, and your kid not partnering with you in that. And so one of the examples I gave is if you go to McDonald's, and let's say the drive-through, and they're handing stuff, there's a few siblings. I said, well, how about if you just, when you're handing the soda or the burger, you just go halfway? What if you just stop right here? Because now the kid has to meet you. They have to come from whatever this seat is to come get this. And oh, thank you. And sometimes it's a lot coming through, so you might raise your voice, hey. But they unbuckle. I'm picturing a van or something. They unbuckle to reach for this. You can do this. What if you just practice here and then they come in for it? And maybe even give it a name. All right, it's burger time. Now later when we're having this phone conversation and I'm asking for the phone, I'm going to talk about the burger time. Like, man, I don't have to yell and I don't have to come and get the phone. In fact, remember the other day at fast food X, Y, and Z? Yeah. Man, I really liked how you helped me. We partnered in that. You actually came and got your food. I didn't have to reach to you. I didn't have to come over to you. Why? Because I wanted my burger. You're taking the phone from me. I get it. I'm just looking for the same collaboration. That the same way you were able to come to get the food, I want to be able to meet you halfway with the phone. Because if not, I feel like I'm not heard. I feel like I'm intruding on your space to have to come to you. I mean, right now, according to his report, the kid is like, fine, but this is like a last second resort. But what happens the day that he's not fine and have to like physically? So I talk about parents understanding that technically you're probably not matching the fear that you had as a kid, but I wonder if that kid has not learned to respect you and only respond to you when you elevated enough and added enough fear.
I hear that, but I'm also thinking about um, a health. I guess I don't know if you would call it a healthy fear or a healthy respect or what what have you. But
Mm-hmm.
for me, in that scenario, my kid wouldn't necessarily have, even if I didn't put hands on and I
Mm-hmm.
might yell, like, didn't I say get my phone? There will
Yeah.
be a natural consequence that will come along with that because
Mm-hmm.
I pay that. Technically, that is my phone that I let you use because I'm paying that bill. So if the rule in my house has been set that we have dinner at 6 o'clock, all electronic devices are put away while we're having our meal, and you did not respect that, that rule has already been established. So if you do not follow the rule, I don't have to take the phone from you. I can cut that mother off.
Yeah.
Have the phone at all. So there is no yelling. There is no physical touch. I can just call T-Mobile. Can you please, close off this line?
Right. But will you really do that?
Back until I determine when you.
You know what I did?
I
called and activated it. I did. Like I knew the last 4 of my dad's. That was back when you had to call. Oh my gosh. I got big trouble then. But yeah, go on, Dr. Nakumbe.
Oh no. Well,
because I do think
1,000,000,000% agree.
Okay.
There's and it's not my term. There's a mentor out there in the YouTube that says people have punk parent syndrome.
What's this person? Put him. I gotta look this person up.
Yeah.
But so the parent wouldn't turn off the phone because they'll say something like, if I turn it off, I won't have access to you.
Yeah, it's an inconvenience to them.
Yeah, something might happen to you. Someone might kidnap you and be responsible for feeding you, and I won't be able to get a hold of you. So I can't turn the phone off because I'm the one consequenced. But I'm more of the type that says those folks, they'll probably send them back to me. But realistically, that device hasn't been utilized in that way. Remember those platforms I was talking about? Not one time were they on one of those platforms talking about, oh, I'm scared or blah, 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 in most cases. So access to those platforms is limited due to your ignorance or your unwillingness to follow the rules we have set in the home. The home comes first, secondary first. And if you're so influenced to this and you can't comply with the rules, then I wonder if this device is even serving you in a good way at all. And then I agree. At some point, you have to still be willing to establish that you're the parent. You can always learn new skills on how to do that, so it doesn't have to be whatever. But once you lose that boundary, once that boundary caves in, once you lose that respect, or the people have lost respect for you, it's like double the effort. It's quadruple the effort, and then you lose the teen to these influences that are caught up in their feelings. So
I think sometimes parents find it difficult to know how to draw the boundary between being the friend and the parent. And so as the child gets older, they begin to see you as their equal. And I'll just speak for our household when our kids were growing up. Our kids always respected our position because our position was important and they understood it. So they never overstepped the boundary between parent, and even though it was like, oh, your parents are cool, the cool parent, they probably didn't think we were cool. But, the thing was that we always have had open communication with our children. Yeah. And I know for me, that was very, very important for me as a parent because I didn't have that when I was growing up. It was like, do as I say, that's it. No question. Why can't I? Because I said so.
Right.
It was never that part of it. So I swore when I grew up, I would never do that with my kids. Yeah. And so, and now once I began parenting, now I understood sometimes where because I told you so was necessary,
applicable.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Was necessary. But I would say more often than not, it was always an opportunity of the allowing the why.
Yeah.
to
Huge.
right,
Huge.
to be
Yes.
asked and explained. But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it was also teaching when to ask the why. When I'm
Yes.
in the middle of correcting or saying something,
Yeah.
that is not the time to give your opinion
Yeah.
or tell me what you're going to do or why you can't do. Just do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then we can always come back and have that conversation. So the door
Yes.
was never closed on the conversation. It was
Right.
when I'm asking you to do something, that means go ahead and do it within that 5-second window that I'm giving you to respond and do it.
Yeah.
But if what I told you was wrong and we have that conversation later on and you explain to me, Mom, the reason I did X, Y, and Z was because of, I'm open to listening to that. And if I'm wrong,
Right.
I also didn't mind apologizing.
Right.
Say, you know what? I'm sorry. This is
Right.
what I thought happened. And
So
that's why I
yes. Yes.
responded the way that I did. But now that you've explained it to me, I apologize. And
Right.
I think sometimes we as parents don't feel like we owe apologies to our children,
Right.
or
Right.
that we can't go back and correct and say that I'm wrong. I should not have done that. But I think by doing that, that actually opens the door for your kids to feel even more comfortable with coming to talk to you about things. And not only that, you're teaching them how to respond as adults when they do something wrong.
Yes.
Yes. So
right. So teaching those mutual respect skills, even with staying in our roles, right? Because your age, you'll never catch me in age. You'll never catch me as in like, as far as when it comes to being equal. Now we're family, but my specific role, I have specific duties and responsibilities and tasks that you aren't there yet. But the respect can be mutual again within our respective roles.
correct.
Respective roles. I'm aware of
That's
time.
good.
As
Yeah.
much as this
Yeah.
conversation is loving it, I do want to get to this last question, if I may. It was earlier about the 504, and let me ask Coach K, did you have any other what we're talking about now? Did you have anything else for
Um,
that
the
before I
last
switch?
thing I kind of want to add, I won't have really final thoughts after that, is that I like what you just said, the respective roles, because something I do teach my clients about their relationships and things like that. But I do teach them that your relationship, though, the dynamic with your parent, though, that's different.
Right.
And or your boss, an employee, those are different, though.
Yeah.
So I definitely tell them about that. But also, the last thing I wanted to add is that with the phones, and this can be a conversation at another time, extended, but that I think there's good limits, but I also want to teach my clients and then eventually my kids how to not to have safe limits, but how they can have their own limits, because kids around them are going to have their phones. Like, I would rather not have to take things away
Mm,
to, kind of mold their behavior. I would rather
right.
them have drugs in front of them and then be able to say no, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's not as simple, but that's all I wanted
Right.
to add. So,
But it
but go
sounds
ahead,
like
Dr.
learning
Covey.
that. Yeah. So I can say, but if I hear you correctly,
Mhm.
it's about learning how to say no, or having that willingness or courage or motivation to say no, and not just saying it because that's what you were supposed to say, or
That
that's what I
self-control.
pressured you to say. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
That
Yes.
was, I actually remember a conversation with my son around drugs and alcohol and things like that. So he knows, like, me, like I said, we share things. But what I had told him, I said, I'm not naive to think that you may not ever try.
Right.
I'm not, I said, just because that was my experience, it wasn't yours. And I said, to be honest, I have friends and I was around them while they did some of that stuff.
Mm,
I
yeah.
Mhm.
never did it.
Right.
But I said, the thing that I want for you, though, is if you do it, that
hmm
is your choice. that you are making the decision to say, I want to try this, and not necessarily doing it because everybody else around you is doing it or someone is pressuring you to do it. So for me, that's the bigger thing. If I had a choice and can make sure you won't ever do it, of course, as a parent, I would be like, no. But I understand that once you leave the protection of this household, you're going to be faced with things that you're going to have to learn how to deal with on your own. The biggest thing is you have to understand your own boundaries, your own standards, and live by that. So if you ever did anything, right or wrong, understand that it is your decision that you made. You cannot put that on anybody else, not saying that you were influenced. So, that was kind of the conversation that we ended up having. And I think that has helped in him finding himself, right? Him going up into like just dancing to the beat of his own drum. So there was, some things that he did that, of course, I didn't agree with, but other things that he just steered clear from because he's like, yeah, that's just not my thing, So
in closing, that question, and thank you, by the way, for both of you with your responses. This question was, so once it was back about the 504. So once they leave high school, is the last 504 still valid if they choose a trade school or college? We have about 3 minutes to wrap up. So does it still count in trade school or college?
Again, like I said earlier, it would have to be, they would have to self-disclose that they have that disability or impairment and required supports. So if they go to that trade school or, college, they would need to go to the disabilities office and disclose their disability. And then that office will let them know what documentation that they need to, set that up. And sometimes it is if they, disclose that they had a 504 in high school, that may be part of that documentation packet that they would include a copy of the most recent 504 that they had, so they can see what accommodations they had. They may also require you to have a updated psychoeducational evaluation that's at least within the last 2 to 3 years, depending on the institution. So, yeah.
Okay. Ms. T. Shaw, if you're still here, hopefully you heard that answer, or hopefully you hear it in the replay. Thank you, everyone, so much for being here tonight. Please hit that like button and make sure you subscribe to the channel. We look forward to being here each week, providing as much content for you as possible when it comes to mental health and breaking that chain and breaking away from those myths about you can't be better, you can't be healthier, you can't be any of these things, and that mental health has to be you, or you are what you've been diagnosed. That's not the case at all. We want you to have healthy, happier. I don't know if we really want happy. Happy is subjective, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that contrast.
Healthier lives for sure. Miss Miss Taken, do you have any closing 30-second remarks?
Just thank you for having me here.
Thank you for being here.
This conversation is so different from previous conversations on the podcasts that I have, but youth is my passion, specifically at-risk youth. That has always been in my background because I see a lot of me in them, and want to assist in helping them find who they are early on to avoid some of the pitfalls. So I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Miss Taken, I will say this. Welcome to the channel. It's like you can see to come back more because there's so much information that I'm sure that probably will be start on the channel. I am humbled to hear your voice and the knowledge, the information. It's just like I'm a dad, my son's school's nearby, and some of the stuff you're telling me now, I gotta go back and start checking these. On behalf of Black Men Unfiltered, I'm glad you came here, and I hope you can come back again.
Thank you.
Thank you
Absolutely.
again. Truly.
Coach K, thank you for inviting Miss Taken, and thank you for those who are in the chat. We appreciate the conversation, the dialogue, and keeping the conversation going. CBN, thank you very much for doing what you do. Black Men Unfiltered, thank you for allowing this space. We appreciate you. Coach K, always an honor to share this space with you. Everyone
and you.
Thank you. Everyone, we wish you a fabulous night and rest of your weekend. Please tune in to the network on what do we have tomorrow? Who's tomorrow? I know Friday is barbershop,
I believe.
Tomorrow will be the barbershop for all the budgets come out here.
All right.
And
Wednesday,
be uncut. We don't have a salon yet. We don't have a salon yet. We'll try to do it for the ladies.
And I'm sorry, I didn't know what I'm sorry, I cut you out. I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I think you don't have a salon for the lady. You only have the barbershop.
Yeah. But we have night on Tuesdays, right? Don't we have
sometimes
on the first Tuesday of every month.
First Tuesday of every month. So Tuesdays, Talk Tuesdays. All right. Thank you again. Good night, everyone.
Thank you guys. Bye.
Thank you, Miss Taken.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miss Taken.